Three bikers roared into the southern Texas rest stop. An old man in a faded military jacket stood up, about to ask them to quiet down. "This old-timer looking to die early," one shouted before punching him square in the face. They didn't know. He once commanded an elite Marine squad, and the witness who saw everything had dialed exactly the right number. Common respect, if you believe a veteran's silence, is sometimes the final warning. Walter Sanderson wiped condensation from his coffee mug, withered fingers tracing the Marine Corps emblem. The small border rest stop near El Paso buzzed with travelers. At 75, Walt moved deliberately, but his posture remained military straight, a habit from 30 years of service. His RV sat outside, dusty from 3 days on the road. The annual pilgrimage from Oklahoma to the military cemetery near the Mexican border had become ritual over 15 years. 6 graves to visit, 6 brothers to honor, 6 promises to keep. Walt opened his leather journal, recording the day's journey in precise handwriting. He'd filled 17 journals with observations and quiet reflections. Today's entry mentioned the sunset over the Franklin Mountains and a young family he'd helped with a flat tire. The rest stop's door banged open. 3 men in leather vests emblazoned with Los Fonros patches strutted in, heavy boots echoing across the floor. Their faces were hard beneath unkempt beards. "Where's the beer in this hole?" the tallest one bellowed, kicking a chair. The young cashier flinched. "Sir, we don't serve alcohol. There's a gas station 3 miles. "Useless," he snapped, turning to his companions. "Tony, check if they've got anything worth taking." A family with small children huddled together. The father stared at his plate, avoiding confrontation. Walt watched silently, coffee untouched. Tony swept his arm across a display of souvenirs, sending items crashing to the floor. A child began crying at the noise. Walt stood slowly. "Fellas," he said, voice calm but authoritative. "There are children present. Might want to mind your language and behavior." The rest stop fell silent. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto Walt, sizing up the elderly man in his faded Marine jacket with campaign ribbons still pinned to the pocket. The leader stepped forward, towering over Walt. "What's that, Grandpa? You got something to say to me?" Walt didn't back down. Nothing complicated, just suggesting some common courtesy. The third biker laughed harshly. "Hey, Diesel, looks like we found ourselves a Rambo. Probably thinks his war stories still matter." Diesel circled Walt like a predator. "You think you're somebody, old man? Think anyone gives about whatever war you limped home from?" Walt remained still, hands relaxed at his sides. "I'm nobody special. Just suggesting you show some respect for these folks." "Respect?" Diesel spat. "Let me show you what I think about respect." The punch came fast, catching Walt on the cheekbone. Despite his age, Walt managed to roll with it enough to stay standing, but blood trickled from a split above his eye. Tony shoved him from behind, sending Walt sprawling. His cap fell off, and a small canvas bag tumbled from his pocket, spilling its contents: a silver star, 3 purple hearts, and a worn photograph of young Marines. Diesel stomped on the items, grinding them under his boot. "That enough respect for you, hero?" No one intervened. The cashier trembled, one hand near the phone. The family huddled closer. 2 truckers stared into their coffee. Walt gathered his medals, wiping blood from his face with a napkin. He looked up at the bikers without hatred, only weariness in his eyes. "I don't need you boys to be afraid," he said quietly. "I just want you to remember, I've seen more than you've ever dared to face." Diesel spat on the floor beside Walt. "Let's go. This place stinks of old man and failure." The bikers stormed out, engines roaring to life in the parking lot. Walt carefully tucked his medals back into their bag, picked up his cap, and returned to his seat. The cashier approached with fresh napkins. "Sir, I'm calling the police." Walt shook his head. "No need. Some lessons can't be taught by police." He reopened his journal, making a single notation: El Paso rest stop. Los Fonros. 3 men remembered Mosul today. The desert heat shimmered as Walt guided his RV along the empty highway. His cheek throbbed where Diesel's fist had connected, but physical pain barely registered anymore. At 75, Walt had cataloged enough injuries to know this one would heal quickly. His mind wandered back to Mosul 2005. Command had tasked Echo 7, his 12-man squad, with clearing buildings in a contested neighborhood. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, but intelligence was often wrong. The ambush came 3 buildings in. Heavy fire pinned down half his squad, while an RPG collapsed their exit route. Private Jenkins took shrapnel to his femoral artery. Corporal Diaz caught a round through his shoulder. Lieutenant Murray suffered a concussion from the blast. Walt remembered the decision clearly. He'd ordered his remaining men to establish a defensive position around the wounded, then taken only his sidearm and a smoke grenade to create a diversion. The enemy fighters, expecting a full retreat, diverted forces to cut off what they thought was the main group. 7 hours later, after Medevac extracted his men, Walt appeared at the FOB covered in dust and blood, none of it his own. When asked about his escape, he'd simply said, "Just kept moving until I wasn't surrounded anymore." The report recommended him for a Silver Star. Walt accepted it only because refusing would have required additional paperwork. The medal joined others in a canvas bag he rarely opened. Echo 7 suffered no fatalities that day, but war eventually collected its due. Lieutenant Murray died 3 months later in another ambush. Diaz stepped on an IED during his second tour. Jenkins made it home, but lost his battle with PTSD 4 years after discharge. 3 others fell in various deployments over the next decade. Walt had attended every funeral, standing silent in the back, departing before family members could approach him. He kept his promises simple: remember their names, visit their graves, live a life worthy of their sacrifice. After retirement, Walt opened a small garage specializing in motorcycle and vehicle repair. He charged standard rates for civilians, but never accepted payment from veterans. His shop became an unofficial gathering place for former service members spanning multiple generations in conflicts. A framed photograph hung on the garage wall. Echo 7 at full strength. Young faces beneath helmets and gear, no names, just the date and brothers handwritten beneath. Customers often asked about it, but Walt never elaborated beyond good men. He adhered to simple principles. Fix what's broken if you can. Speak only when necessary. Hold yourself accountable, and never forget those who served alongside you. His modest home contained few luxuries, but his garage boasted state-of-the-art tools and a coffee pot that never emptied. Every year, Walt closed the shop for 2 weeks to make his pilgrimage. 6 graves in 3 states, each receiving a full day of his time. He would arrive at dawn, place fresh flowers, clean the headstone, and sit in a folding chair until sunset, sometimes reading aloud from books they had enjoyed, sometimes recounting memories only he still carried. Walt had tried explaining once to a young Marine who visited his garage, troubled after his first deployment. "Being afraid doesn't make you weak," he'd said while replacing a timing belt. "Acting despite fear makes you strong." The guys who claim they're never scared are either lying or haven't faced anything truly worth fearing yet. The young man had asked how Walt stayed so calm all the time. Walt's response became something of a mantra among local veterans. Silence isn't weakness. It's the strength of someone who's faced death and still got back up. Walt didn't own a computer, had no social media presence, and kept his television tuned to weather reports and baseball games. When customers insisted he needed to get with the times, he simply smiled and said, "The world's noisy enough without me adding to it." His cell phone, a basic flip model, contained only 7 numbers: the garage's landline, his doctor, and 5 surviving members of Echo 7 scattered across the country. They rarely called each other, but the understanding remained that any call, day or night, would be answered, and whatever was needed would be provided without question. As the RV crested a hill, the military cemetery came into view, white markers stretching in perfect formation across the desert landscape. Walt pulled into the visitors' parking area, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for several minutes, touching the bruise on his face. "Almost forgot why I came," he murmured. "Thanks for the reminder, boys." He reached for his uniform cap, straightened it carefully, and stepped out into the harsh sunlight, ready to keep the promises that had sustained him for decades. Mia Cortez wiped down the counter at the rest stop, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. The bruised old Marine had left after finishing his coffee, refusing her offer to call an ambulance or police. Mia's father had served in the Marines, leaving her with respect for veterans and knowledge to recognize the significance of the medals the bikers had desecrated. When her shift ended, she pulled out her phone and reviewed the video she'd secretly recorded. The footage showed 3 bikers assaulting an elderly man, stomping on military decorations, the old Marine's quiet dignity. Mia hesitated briefly before uploading it to a veteran support page her father followed. "Does anyone recognize this man or these bikers?" she wrote. "This happened today at the Highway 10 rest stop near El Paso." 2,000 miles away in North Carolina, James "Doc" Peterson was closing his physical therapy practice when his phone buzzed. The 68-year-old former Navy corpsman scrolled through his feed, stopping abruptly at Mia's video. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, recognizing both Walt and the Echo 7 patch on his jacket. Doc hadn't seen Walt in person since Murray's funeral 12 years ago, but some faces you never forget. Within an hour, the video had been shared across veteran networks. By midnight, it reached 4 more members of Echo 7. Michael Reyes, now a high school principal in California, was first to call document. "Is that the sergeant?" "Affirmative," Doc replied. Someone caught up with him on his annual tour. "Los Fongros," Reyes said. "Small-time outfit between Texas and Mexico. Not affiliated with any major club, just thugs using biker patches to intimidate." "Anyone reach out to Walt?" "Would he answer if we did?" Reyes asked. Both men knew Walt wouldn't want fuss, wouldn't seek vengeance, would be embarrassed by attention. But Echo 7 operated by its own code, established in combat and refined through years of service. "I can be in Texas by tomorrow afternoon," Doc said. "I'll book the first flight out," Reyes replied. "Already called Thompson and Rodriguez. They're in." "What about Carter?" "Living in Austin now. Says he knows people who can track Los Fangros' movements. They crossed back into Mexico 3 hours ago. Currently in Monterrey, so we're doing this. Echo 7, one last patrol." "Walt won't like it." "Walt doesn't need to know." 48 hours later, 5 men in their 60s and 70s converged on a small airfield outside Austin. Carter handed out folders containing location data and intelligence on Los Fongros. "They're celebrating at their usual spot," Carter explained. "A cantina in Monterrey called El Toro Negro." "Border crossing?" Thompson asked, examining routes. "I've got us covered," Carter said. "Private airstrip near the border. Then jeeps waiting on the Mexican side. We'll be invisible." Rodriguez looked up from his phone. "Just got confirmation on the cantina security. 2 cameras, basic setup. I can loop the feed for 20 minutes. Are we clear on parameters?" Doc asked. "This isn't combat. We're not 25 anymore. We make a point, but nobody gets hurt unless absolutely necessary." Reyes nodded. "Echo 7 protocols. Minimum force, maximum effect." "For Walt," Thompson said quietly. "For Walt," the others echoed. The operation proceeded with precision. By nightfall, 5 unremarkable vehicles parked around El Toro Negro, and 5 unremarkable older men in civilian clothes converged on its entrance. Inside, the cantina pulsed with music. Diesel, Tony, and the 3rd biker, Marcos, sat at a corner table, enjoying their status. The 5 members of Echo 7 surrounded the bikers' table. Carter approached first, placing a printed image from Mia's video in front of Diesel. "You boys touched the wrong Marine," he said calmly. Diesel looked up, confusion turning to amusement. "Who are you supposed to be?" "The AARP patrol." Doc placed a hand on Diesel's shoulder, applying precise pressure to a nerve cluster that instantly caused the larger man's arm to go numb. "That man you assaulted, Walter Sanderson, Marine Corps Force Recon. Our squad leader through 3 deployments," Reyes added. "The medals you stomped on. Silver Star for pulling 7 men out of an ambush. Purple Hearts from wounds received saving others." Tony reached toward his waistband, but Thompson captured the man's wrist in a joint lock that required minimal strength but caused maximum discomfort. "We're not here to fight," Thompson said softly. We could, but you wouldn't enjoy the outcome. Rodriguez placed a device on the table that projected a holographic display of Los Fangros' route over the past 48 hours. We found you in 2 days, Rodriguez noted. Imagine what we could do if we actually wanted to hurt you. What do you want, money? Marcos asked, pale-faced. Reyes laughed. We don't want anything except awareness. You're now on the radar of every legitimate military motorcycle club in the Southwest. They know your faces, bikes, routes. Carter slid a document across the table. Official notification that Los Fangros had been blacklisted by the Veterans Motorcycle Association. You thought the world wasn't watching, Doc concluded. But some guardians never stop standing watch. They just get quieter about it. The 5 men stepped back in perfect coordination, their message delivered. As they turned to leave, Diesel found his voice. You can't. We already did, Rodriguez interrupted. And son, Walter Sanderson saved all our lives multiple times. If he'd wanted to, despite his age, he could have put all 3 of you in the hospital. The fact that he didn't isn't because he couldn't. It's because he's a better man than you'll ever understand. The video went viral 3 days after Mia posted it. A veteran's blog reshared it with the title, Old Marine Gets Justice's Way, splicing in footage mysteriously obtained from El Toro Negro that showed the 5 elderly men confronting the bikers. No one questioned how that footage had been acquired or who had edited the clip to obscure Echo 7's faces while clearly showing the bikers. Comments flooded in by the thousands. My grandfather was a Marine. He would have done the same, taken the hit, and let karma handle the rest. Notice how the old-timer never threw a punch. That's a man who knows he doesn't need to prove anything. Those bikers just learned real warriors don't stop being warriors when they take off the uniform. The video accumulated over 2 million views within a week. News outlets picked up the story, though none successfully identified Walt. The few reporters who tracked down his garage in Oklahoma found it closed for its annual maintenance period. A movement emerged online. Veterans and civilians began posting photos of military family members under the hashtag #RespectTheOldGuard. Stories poured in about quiet heroes, grandfathers who'd stormed beaches, fathers who'd humped through jungles, brothers who'd patrolled mountains, men and women who'd carried their experiences without fanfare. Walt's garage began receiving mail from across the country, letters of support, cards from schoolchildren, and packages containing everything from homemade cookies to expensive bourbon, all addressed simply to the Marine from the rest stop. The local postmaster, himself a Navy veteran, recognized Walt from the video and held the mail until his return. When Walt finally drove his RV back into town after completing his pilgrimage, he found 3 postal bins waiting. "What's all this?" he asked, confused. "You're famous, Walt," the postmaster explained, showing him the viral video on his phone. Walt watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When it finished, he handed the phone back without comment and began sorting through the mail methodically. Halfway through the first bin, he found a letter postmarked from El Paso. Inside was a note from Mia Cortez. "My father was a Marine. He taught me that standing witness is sometimes the most important thing we can do. I stood witness for you. I hope that was okay." Walt read it twice, then carefully placed it in his jacket pocket. 3 days later, Eastwood High School announced that their newly renovated library would be named the Walter Sanderson Resource Center in honor of quiet courage and unwavering principle. Walt declined the invitation but sent a handwritten note, suggesting they name it after Lieutenant Murray instead. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Post in Oklahoma City organized a silent honor observance, during which participants sat in complete silence for 7 minutes, one for each member of Echo 7 who had passed away. The event spread to other VFW posts, becoming a monthly tradition. A week after Walt reopened his garage, a young Marine on leave from Camp Pendleton arrived with a motorcycle that wasn't actually broken. After watching Walt work for nearly an hour, he finally asked the question he traveled 1,500 miles to pose. "How did you do it, sir? Stay so calm when they disrespected you like that." Walt continued adjusting the perfectly functional carburetor before answering. "You ever been in a firefight, son?" "3, sir. Afghanistan." "Then you already know. Once you've seen the worst the world can throw at you, watched friends die, made impossible choices, some loudmouth in a leather vest doesn't register as a threat, just noise. But weren't you angry? Of course I was, Walt admitted, wiping his hands. But anger is a luxury for people with something to prove. I proved everything I needed to long ago to the only people whose opinions ever mattered to me. He gestured to the framed photo of Echo 7. The young Marine nodded slowly. The guys from my unit, we try to meet up every year, too. Not all of us make it, though. Keep trying, Walt advised. Those connections matter more than anything else you'll bring home. More veterans began appearing at the garage, some with legitimate repair needs, others simply seeking a few minutes in Walt's presence. He treated them all the same. Fair prices or no charge if they insisted they were friends of friends. Minimal conversation. Excellent work. None mentioned the viral video directly. None needed to. In their world, some things were understood without requiring discussion. Walter Sanderson made one change to his routine following the incident. Instead of traveling alone on his cemetery pilgrimages, he began taking veterans along, never more than one at a time. Always someone struggling with their return to civilian life. They would ride in the old RV, often in comfortable silence for hours, until Walt would suddenly speak, sharing a story about the man they were traveling to honor. Not war stories, but human ones. How Jenkins could imitate any accent perfectly. How Rodriguez knew every word to obscure disco songs. How Murray wrote poetry he never showed anyone but Walt. The first companion was the young Marine from Camp Pendleton. Others followed. An Army sergeant haunted by decisions made in Kandahar. A Navy corpsman who couldn't stop seeing the faces of those she couldn't save. A drone operator suffering moral injury from strikes ordered from thousands of miles away. Walt never offered solutions or platitudes. He simply provided presence, the invaluable gift of companionship without judgment. The healing happened in the spaces between words, in the shared understanding that some experiences cannot be processed alone. In his garage, a new sign appeared beside the Echo 7 photograph, a simple wooden plaque carved with the words, Echo 7, still watching. Customers who asked about its meaning received only Walt's characteristic half-smile and returned attention to whatever repair was underway. Each year, on the anniversary of the Rest Stop confrontation, Walt would drive to the border and leave a small American flag at the exact spot where he'd been assaulted. Beneath it, he'd place a handwritten note. You didn't break me. You reminded me why I served. The Los Fongros eventually disbanded, their reputation irreparably damaged among the biker community. Their patches became collector's items among veterans, symbols of what happens when the wrong people are underestimated. Doc, Reyes, Thompson, Rodriguez, and Carter never publicly acknowledged their intervention in Mexico. When asked about it during a rare Echo 7 reunion at Walt's garage, Doc simply said, some operations remain classified indefinitely. Walt received one official communication about the incident, a letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps expressing profound respect for your continued embodiment of our core values. Walt read it once, then added it to his correspondence, kept in a footlocker beneath his bed. On his 80th birthday, Walt awoke to find his property transformed. Overnight, hundreds of small American flags had been planted along his driveway, each bearing the name of a veteran who considered Walt a silent guardian of their shared legacy. No cameras recorded his reaction. No social media posts celebrated the moment. The veterans responsible maintained the same code of quiet honor that Walt had demonstrated throughout his life. When asked by his neighbor how it felt to have touched so many lives, Walt considered the question before responding with characteristic economy. Didn't do anything special, he said, gazing at the sea of flags rippling in the Oklahoma breeze. Just kept the promises I made. Some warriors never really stop standing watch. They just change how they guard what matters most, not with weapons or words, but with unwavering presence and the courage to remain standing when others look away. If you believe some warriors never really stop protecting us, even without a uniform, hit like, comment Echo 7 forever to honor those who still stand watch in silence. And if someone in your life once taught you to fight with honor, share this story for them.